Good morning, everybody. Our first set of images here come from GOES 16. So this is one of our geostationary satellites. It's in an orbit out there about 36,000 kilometers away from Earth's surface, and it's snapping a picture of Hurricane Lee, which is now at Category 5 strength every single minute, and radios it back to us here. So this is a beautiful view of the very, very cold cloud tops around Lee's very well-defined eye. The sun had just risen over Lee as I was recording this morning, so I like the infrared imagery to kind of give us perspective on why this storm system's got a lot of strength in it and what we expect to see over the coming days and actually week. We still have a lot more time left with Lee. It may be another 8 days before we start to see this getting close to land. So the things we're always looking for here is a very intense ring of convection, very cold cloud tops right around the entirety of the eye, which we do see here. And can you almost see the clockwise spreading out of the very high thin cirrus? That is the way the top of these systems work. So there's anomalously high pressure on top of the extremely low pressure within the eye of the hurricane. And so you get this clockwise spinning out on top of it. So every time we see that, and we get this kind of buzzsaw view of a hurricane on infrared satellite, just tells us that they're very intense and that the environment's conducive. So low wind shear, variable motion temperatures, and a very well-defined eye with an intense ring of convection around it. So where this currently sits, though, is here. So here are the Lesser Antilles. Of course, the United States is here. We have another system following. This is Margot, right over here, which was named yesterday. But Lee does not have a whole lot of forward speed. In fact, over the next 5 days, this is what the National Hurricane Center put out in their 5 a.m. update today, East Coast time. So they expect it to maintain major hurricane status, which is Category 3 or higher, all the way to next Wednesday and possibly beyond that. But notice that not projecting, it moving too far, pretty slow. Right now, the speed's 14 miles an hour. That's a pretty good clip for a hurricane, but it's expected to slow down over the weekend into early next week into this area. For broader perspective, this is where Lee sits with respect to Margot. Margot is going to make a pretty hard turn to the north. The steering currents there, due to high pressure jets to its north, are going to help pull it straight up into the central Atlantic. But there's still questions that remain as to whether or not Lee could get close to the U.S. coastline. So let's go ahead and have another look at the latest data we've got. So I'm going to play you again the Super Ensemble. Remember, this only goes out 8 days. They're going to stop this at where the shortest model run goes, which is the UK Met. So what we'll do is we'll play this forward, looking at all of the different forecast ensemble tracks and where things appear to be by the time we get out there to the 16th of September. So that's your 8-day forecast. And overall, again, the models are in pretty good agreement that the system will likely take a pretty good turn to the north and miss the southeast coast. And so we've just been trying to build a body of evidence that this is what we think is going to happen. If we do let the models run out their full 10 days, we can now see that there's the risk of this continuing to get near Maine to Nova Scotia, this whole region here in parts of the Canadian Maritimes in the north, very far northeastern United States. Now, will there be impacts felt along the coast? Sure, there's going to be very rough seas with this. There's going to likely be some coastal beach erosion here. I'm just talking about part of the Northeast, but wherever this makes landfall, it could be a pretty powerful event. And the reason behind all of this is that we do have that trough of low pressure that's going to come in here. So Lee will actually be picked up with the momentum of that trough. They'll one will absorb the other. The trough, being the bigger feature, will absorb Hurricane Lee and potentially make for a pretty intense system that's going to hit parts of the Canadian Maritimes. So we're going to watch for that carefully. Our reasoning hasn't changed too much. Okay, so we just look out there. So here's Lee. Here's the mid-latitude jet stream pattern. As we play this through the weekend, this is Sunday into Monday, the same scenario is setting up here. The timing just adjusts a little bit. The depth adjusts a little bit in each run. But we continue to see over the Great Lakes, but primarily Lake Huron, there's a deeper trough. This will bring in a lot cooler air with high pressure behind it. And as Lee tries to approach, the upper level trough will overwhelm Lee. These are two entirely different size scale of events. And that's why we're going to see Lee getting pulled just like that into the flow. So we still have the uncertainty. I'm all the way out there, by the way, to next Friday. So just for some perspective as to where we are. This is still a week away from us happening. So should anything change, I'll say it again, the position of that trough, or should Lee be farther to the south, then the interaction may not happen. But that would take this high pressure cell being much, much larger than it's currently being forecast. But it is in the realm of possibility to see that. But as it stands, the latest evidence I have here early Friday morning on, September what is today? September not 8th, excuse me. That's what I would expect to see. All right. So that's kind of the latest we've got. No reason to add more to that. That's it. Okay. In the meantime, we've been dealing with some severe weather up the East Coast. We also had some stronger storms down in Louisiana, a couple hail reports in Kansas yesterday, and also some stronger storms right here between Nebraska and South Dakota. But the storms that raced up the East Coast did a lot of wind damage yesterday. Over 410 reports, almost 420 reports of severe weather. I was kind of looking at it this morning on satellite as the sun was rising. I'm going to take you back to yesterday afternoon. We can see this deep cloud shield that was associated with the backside of that trough and the cold front that came through. There's a lot of mist in this yesterday. I was driving around between Indiana and Illinois and certainly felt some of that. But to the south, some very large storms. You can also see the cluster of storms building up here. You can even see some of the smoke later in the day. And then the storms that were just exploding here along the East Coast just as the sun was setting. And that was the storm system that produced all the reports we just talked about. Outside of that, we just play it through the rest of the day and kind of get a good glimpse late in the afternoon across the West Coast. Generally dry, just some pop-up clouds here that come from the heat of the day and the mountains. So that's what we've got. As we look at the last 24 hours of total accumulated precipitation through 5 a.m. this morning, this map just kind of gets us clued in on where that current system is putting down its heaviest rain. And as we look, the overall flow didn't change too much. So we still have the same symptoms here. The ridge that's rolling farther to the south, anchored between Texas and New Mexico, keeping it extremely hot here. There's a rather energetic little shortwave that's kind of sneaking into the south today. There's one that's going to roll over the north, and then this is the flow that's going to help keep the East Coast going. We talked yesterday about Hova and where it's going, so this is expected to continue to weaken as it moves off into the open Pacific Ocean. And here's Hurricane Lee, and this is Margot. So we'll just watch all of these pieces kind of move here, because before we even deal with Hurricane Lee, we do have some places that are going to see some more severe weather today, and then also some very heavy rainfall we got to talk about. So today's day one convective outlook, we're going to watch again from parts of Virginia, West Virginia, clear through parts of Maine. And then again, coming over the top of that ridge, watch for storm complexes to form out of the Red River Valley and get into eastern Texas into Louisiana. We'll also watch the next wave that's running over the ridge get into Montana. To see that best, let's just go right to the high-res NAM. Pick this up about 7 a.m. this morning. Now remember, the model's not going to get the timing perfect. It's not going to get the location perfect. We're looking for the ideas here. So you see that by this evening, that's where we're watching for complexes of storms. Florida, then up the East Coast, and then you can see the storms that are coming right in through this area late this afternoon and this evening. So as we play through Friday night, getting our way into Saturday morning, you can watch some of that rain, possibly some embedded storms getting into North Dakota, South Dakota here. Isolated events that are spinning around this upper level low. Remember seeing it a moment ago? It's right here that'll be coming out of parts of the southeast. So spinning up right there. And we're going to watch for some heavier rain tomorrow night in this region and also along the frontal boundary through here. We can also see, again, remember the overall flow is doing something like this, so there will be better chances all along the mountains for getting lift off the mountains and some of the heat used to make these storms. So we'll keep an eye here coming out of parts of Wyoming into Colorado, Nebraska as we work our way from Saturday into Sunday. So what do we have? There's a low curling through here. There'll be a frontal boundary mixing in with the flow over the ridge. That's what gives us the storms in that area. And before that all goes, we'll watch the East Coast for a lot of wet weather. We stick it all together, and this is what we end up getting for the next 7 days. The newest update from the WPC. So a lot of consistency here in the forecast. We've now seen the models go several days in a row forecasting this area right here, that inner circle, has a pretty good chance of getting over 1.5 inches of precipitation. We're watching the east. Most of this is going to be coming from the storm systems we just talked about over the next couple of days, but there is another low that's going to dive in here next week, curl up over the Great Lakes, and it is also going to increase the rainfall. That is the low that's going to give us the front that's going to ward off Lee, and there you can start to see where Lee is. So let's go ahead and dive into the longer range by going into our multi-model analysis. So I've been doing this all week, so we'll keep it up. We'll do this a lot during the winter, but this summer I really favored a lot of the European model due to the temperature biases in the GFS, which was, I think, messing up a lot of things. So I have GFS left, European right, and we can just kind of play out that same time period. So this is through Friday night and Saturday, getting into Sunday. Let's get it out here to Monday. Now by Monday, high pressure is building in here. It's in both models. Okay, there's the high pressure cell. So there'll be a front that shows up on the nose of that. That's what's going to start to increase the rainfall along the Rocky Mountains down into the south. This is all just lift due to elevation here as the front pushes up against it. So this is now Monday midday. By Monday evening, getting into Tuesday morning, the front cuts right through the Midwest, still producing some heavy rain down here in parts of the southern plains, which is desperately needed. And this is by Wednesday. So that's your next big shot at cooler air coming in the midsection of the country. And now we can see Lee. Lee comes into the picture here in both the GFS and the European model. So that frontal boundary pushes east. So this is the rain we're talking about midweek next week. But look how wet we continue to stay here because of the way that this high pressure cell is pushing the flow up the elevation. Easterly flow kind of coming into parts of Colorado down into Texas. But the low curls up over the eastern Great Lakes, and that's the frontal boundary that's going to possibly push Lee out. And what's interesting is this. The GFS has the low in a very similar position. You can see them both here. And but the difference is Lee is much farther to the north in the GFS than it is in the European. And you can see that difference here with both the mid-latitude lows looking similar in the model, but the tropical lows not. So Lee in the GFS is much farther north than it is in the European, and therefore gets pulled quicker to the north. So this would suggest that next Friday night into early Saturday morning, we're going to be watching Maine to Nova Scotia. If you're looking at the GFS, and over here on the European, it may not hit at all according to the operational European, but it would maybe be Saturday night into Sunday that we're watching it. So that's your 10-day outlook here. But we put all that together. I think this map captures it pretty well here, where our wettest conditions will be there, even though we have a system rolling through here that will bring a front through the Midwest, which we need to see some precipitation there. Midwest, Mid-South area, we're going to be overall drier here. The flow in the west is split. I'll come back to that in just a few seconds and why that's important for the longer range here. But wet up the East Coast because of the low today, the low midweek next week, and then Lee. That's what you've got. So probability maps, chance of getting an inch over the next 10 days, highest in New England, wetter in parts of the Mid-Atlantic down to the Carolinas, and then right in through here. Outside of that, we're looking at a lot of dry area. Chance of getting less than half of an inch of total accumulated precipitation is here. And you can really see we're, again, dry throughout the Mississippi Basin, dry through the Canadian Prairie, or drier, and then dry across the West Coast with this pattern. When we look out there and just say, well, where are we at by day 10? We talked about this all week. We see the invigoration of a subtropical jet. We see the polar jet coming into British Columbia, and then everything's diving here into a broader trough that's anchored between the Great Lakes and kind of the Hudson Bay here. So this is drier air. It's not cooler. It is cooler, but there's no good moisture out of this. There's no good northwest flow. We're past that. So the west gets the split, and that's why it's dry there. The dry air comes in on the backside of the trough. That's what we got. But there's better momentum down here farther south. So we expect to see wetter conditions here and up the East Coast in this pattern. And that's kind of what our outlook shows us. You see where we're drier. You see where it's wetter here and wetter up the East Coast. That's in all three models. It's kind of making a lot of sense here to us, given the jet stream is really going to be taking on this look that reminds me a whole lot more of what winter will look like than this late summer time period. Broader context on this rainfall, this is what the last little over 3 weeks has looked like in terms of precipitation ranks by climate district. So just to illustrate the extent of the dry conditions from Texas all the way to Minnesota and surrounding states, it's really quite telling where the moisture has missed for a while, and now you can see this in much better context to this map. So while we're getting some relief in this area, there's a big section of the Midwest, Mid-South, Upper Midwest that is going to continue to stay quite dry. Now outside of this, of course, this is all from Hillary, and we do have dryness right here in parts of the Mid-Atlantic we got to keep a close eye on. DC got very hot this week, and so it's also been very dry there. But the other part of this is, again, just to look at the latest soil moisture. I decided to only go down to 16 inches today, or 40 centimeters, just to kind of give you a different perspective on how dry those soils are. And the concern here, again, I just got to keep coming back to it. I think it's going to be about for those that really rely on the river for barge traffic and what that means to commerce for agriculture. The river's at 7.52 feet below low stage. A year ago, we were at low stage, so you could make an argument we're about 7 feet below where we were a year ago. And if the moisture does not begin its return, then we've got major concerns for what this is going to mean for October, November, December, critical months before the river kind of really slows down later. All right, temperature side of this, 5:40 this morning. It was 84 degrees in Dallas. So that's hard to even imagine for folks that live up farther to the north. I mean, to have an overnight low in the mid 80s. Phoenix was 91. And so just incredible to see how warm these things were. We still have our excessive heat warnings out for this large section of Texas, some air quality issues farther to the north, some heat here in New England. But as we take a look at where the temperatures are expected to be today, this kind of shows you that heat's relative, right? So we have an excessive heat watch or advisory and warning down here, and we also have one here, but the temperature difference is 20 degrees. So just neat to see that. Cooler air continues to sit over parts of the Ohio Valley up to the eastern Great Lakes. We then watch as we go into Saturday and Sunday, the next bout of cold air comes in, and watch this cool air sink right down here into the southern plains by Monday. This is the front that we're going to be watching that's going to steer off LEAP. Been talking about it all week. Look at that cool air. So by next Tuesday, Wednesday, the low you had last night will be your high, Dallas. So I'm excited for you in that regard. But this is going to continue just to push a bunch of cool air in this area. And the models really hang on to that. So if you just look out here at this is our 15-day window of temperatures. It's a 5-day sliding average. This is day 5 through 10. And this is day 10 through 15. So we kind of see that same pattern continuing. Now, what I'm going to do next is give you a little international, and I want to talk about some longer range stuff. I think a lot of this is going to start with what the MJO has been up to. So we've talked a lot about how it's been repositioned here over the kind of the eastern side of the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent. That would, of course, be Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and Australia. And it's expected to stay here for a little while. And why I think this is important is because we can look for where that rising motion is. So the blue-green color is where there's rising motion, so we see a lot of it here. We see a lot of suppression over parts of South America. We see some of it over the Caribbean. And these are two areas that will remain quite inactive with respect to weather. This is going to continue to make the Panama Canal drought worse. This is going to make the drought in Mexico worse. This is going to suppress hurricane formation after Lee and Margot get going. So that's what we got over the next 5 days. Day 5 through 10, look at how strong this subsidence is going to be over South America. I'll talk to you about what that's going to result in. But we continue to see a lot of lift in this area. We're drier in Australia, but a lot of lift in this area. And this is day 10 through 15. Now, at that point, we start to see better rising motion over Africa. So we're going to watch the end of this month really give us better indications of tropical activity. But what you need to take note of here is the subsidence that's happening here. This is where the monsoon gets going in South America, and this would be at the start of the planting season, and the likelihood of it getting going in a big way has been quite limited. So I don't know, maybe a good way to stitch that together is just to show you the next 10 days, all right? So if we take a close look here at let's go to Africa. This is where we get past the next 5 days. We start to see the reinvigoration of the monsoon. So that's why I think the end of the month starts kicking systems off again. All right. You then come over here to Southeast Asia where and Indonesia, where the MJO is currently living. We have a big push of moisture throughout Southeast Asia. And remember, we just hit this with a major typhoon. So there's already flooding here. Maybe you saw some of the videos of the flooding in Hong Kong. They're expecting more heavy rain to continue. India's getting a very, very late push of rainfall. This would be the tail end of the monsoon, but they're almost off my color bar here in terms of how they are compared to average. So this is 4 inches of additional rainfall. You do see some wetter conditions up in the North China Plain as well. Throughout much of Europe, we're going over drier. Except for over here across parts of Western Europe. We see some wetter conditions from Spain to the UK. Australia, as I mentioned, drier. You can see the North American pattern that we just talked about. But let's take a look here at South America, because we talked yesterday about how much flooding has already happened down here in Rio Grande do Sul. And it almost looks as though the models are giving you the same forecast they did yesterday. There's a stalled out frontal boundary here, and we're expecting to see possibly another 100 to maybe 150 millimeters of rainfall. So that's 4 to 6 inches of rainfall down here, continuing to cause major flooding. Meanwhile, while Mato Grosso do Sul and western Mato Grosso are expecting to get rainfall, there's going to be a slow start to planting because of the lack of good moisture. So they can start planting a week from now. Those that didn't get early permission can start a week from now, and we're not forecasting the moisture that's going to be needed for them to really get cranking. So bigger picture things, now that we've kind of just taken that international look, our El Nino continues to just thrive. And we talked about this all week, but we're just continuing to see stronger and stronger evidence that El Nino will have a major influence on the pattern this winter. And if you don't remember, NOAA has a great article on what typical El Nino winters look like, and it looks something like this. So if we kind of blow that up a little bit, we just tend to have that. Remember I said that flow that splits? I just showed you this. This is what the jet stream's doing right now. That's what we tend to see during winter. So we get a lot of warmer conditions north. It tends to be drier in the mid-south, midwest, although I don't think this is going to happen this year, and very active across the south, very wet. So I show you that because I want to add one new model suite onto our long-range forecasting, which we did all week. It's the National Multi-Model Ensemble. So this is 8 separate models. Most of them are in North America. There's one that's international. So we can just go dive right in and say, well, for the United States, show me what they call season 1. So here are the models, okay? And they're all stitched together into this map. So this is the ensemble put all together. So this says October, November, December. And as we've been making a case, we expected wetter conditions to show up in these 2 places. Remember those maps I've been showing you? That's where we're seeing it. So the ensemble's got average to above average precipitation there, drier mostly in the Pacific Northwest. I don't buy into this drier signal into Southern California in the models. I think we're going to see more of a jet stream interaction there. If we just kind of step it forward, let's go to season 2, look at that precipitation rate. This is my biggest concern for early winter, the Pacific Northwest. When you get flow that splits and comes together here, it's really active in this area, but it splits there. And that is the top of mind region for drought development. I think we're going to see drought reduction through much of the south, much of the Midwest as we get into winter, but not here in the Pacific Northwest. That is a major worry I have. Let's just dive right into winter. So remember what I told you? Let's go look at it again. This is the typical winter pattern. Notice what I see here. Drier, drier, very wet, very wet. The thing I don't buy is this. I think we're going to have an active winter throughout the Mid-South, Midwest, and it's going to be one that's going to do a lot to reduce drought. So just speaking of drought, look at this. This is the newest drought monitor. We got this yesterday, and we've seen an expansion of drought in several areas. In fact, if you just go look at the change maps, here we go. This is the last week. That's where we've seen drought getting worse, everywhere that you see that color. So very little drought improvement, but a lot of degradation across the United States. And again, it just comes back to this. This is what we're continuing here. I do expect, if we just take a look at this quickly here at the end, time series, we are currently right now at 50.98% of the lower 48 in some form of drought. I think by the time we get through winter, we're going to cut that in half, maybe even more, because of what this winter could hold for us. Now, the flip side of all of this, in the other hemisphere, is that if we look out there at, I don't know, let's just do season 2 global. Whoops, that was temperatures, I'm sorry. I want precipitation rate. I don't often look at the temperatures from these models. Look, this is a big concern. El Nino, this would be El Nino to the T. There is risk of a weaker monsoon this year. Wetter conditions in southern Brazil and Argentina. We've talked about that for weeks. That's showing up in the models. Drier in Australia, drier in Indonesia. But the shift in the El Nino conditions tends to make it very wet in through here. Now, one last piece to show you. All the concern we've talked about lately about the early planting, I want to take you way out there, global precipitation rate at the very end of the forecast run. You see February, March, and April. Now, April, that's the critical month. April tends to be the month where the monsoon slows down. And if the monsoon is going to be very intricately related to the El Nino signal, we could see an early shutdown of the monsoon, which could affect safrinha corn and safrinha cotton and all of the second season crops in Brazil. So I know that this is now over the next, what is that? That's 8 months we're going to be watching it. But it's worth the note just to keep an eye on here. So just something of concern as we watch this El Nino grow and its influence on the pattern. Hey, have a great weekend. I will talk to you again next week, And until then, just be safe and enjoy it. Thanks.